you take the challenge and do the one sitting reading? Oh, good, good. How do you find it? It's not that difficult, isn't it? Just read through it, and then all you need is really space up your time. Blur. Blur in what sense? Read so yeah, you got to, don't overdo it like too fast and you don't get anything, but don't dwell in one passage too long. Try to read in different version. That's the next thing I would like to do. Like if you try it once in, some of you use NKJV, try do once in RSV, for example, or NIV or ESV. Try do a different version. Reasons because sometimes the translations can be a bit misleading, and it may be because of the words that they use. It can be a bit confusing sometimes. So it's good to read Bible in different translations. Whenever I do Bible study in my church, I try to encourage people to read up to 3 translations. Yeah. Why are you so surprised? It's kind of standard, 3 translation for Bible study. You read. That's what your pastor preach. What? Oh, in NIV it sounds this. In ESV, how do they know? They have to do it. They have to read it in different translations, because when they translate differently, every translation is an interpretation. When you translate, you have to interpret. And the choice of word they use to translate, it really depends on which school of thoughts, which tradition it comes from. I think most of us, when you buy a Bible, you don't read the preface, right? There's actually a preface telling you in each Bible, they tell you who are the translators, and then what tradition it comes from, and so forth, right? So it's good that you get to know a bit about your translation. So every translation have a different slant of translating things. And that's the reason why it's good to read a few translations, even for English. Now, for those of you who have studied Greek before, then even better, you read it in Greek. Anyone here have done Greek before? No? Oh. Okay, if you have not done Greek, it's fine. My concern is for some people who knows a little bit of Greek, then they thought they know it all. That one dangerous. I would rather say you say you don't know lah. You know a bit and then you think you know it all. Dangerous. Okay. Now we will continue from where we stopped last week, and in the introductory chapters of Romans, I think we stopped here in Romans 1:16 to 17, which really is the main topic for this whole book, this whole letter. And I will highlight just a few things here. In verse 16 to 17, Paul highlighted these few things. The first thing is, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Now, why Paul says that? You need to realize that in the first century world, the gospel that Christians are proclaiming sounds ridiculous in the years of, if I want to use the word pagans, or in the years of non-believers. Not even for the Jews. The Jews also find it very ridiculous. Because this whole idea of God coming into human flesh is already ridiculous. Why God want to become human? Right? That's the first thing. Secondly, why would your God die for you? You should die for your God. Right? And it sounds like a failure. And how can you consider this failure as an act of achievement, which we Christians proclaim? The cross is the glory and the power, which to the foreigners, to Gentiles, especially for the Romans, this is totally absurd. Like, cross is what? Cross is punishment. It's capital punishment. And you're saying that it's like, in today's term, people who get hanged. And you say those who get hanged, this person who get hanged is glorious. Like, doesn't make sense. But this is a criminal. This is someone that the capital, the city's magistrate have decided this is a person that not deserve to live, therefore we're going to punish him. And now you're saying he is resurrected? Okay? So this whole thing about the gospel sounds ridiculous. And in a sense, if you present it to the people back then, people laugh at you. They'll mock you. Later I'll show you a picture that it becomes a graffiti, People draw on the wall with a cross there. It's a mockery. And therefore, Paul said, no, I'm not ashamed of it. In fact, we have to preach it because this is the power of God for salvation. Now, straight away you realize that Paul emphasized that the gospel itself is powerful. Power not in a sense that it's magical power, but it has implication that once you receive it, it gives you a new life. That's why it's powerful. Okay? And secondly, it is only for those who believe. If you reject it, if you do not believe in it, then the power of the gospel does not manifest in you. Right? And which he will later on build upon, but this is really the introduction of the letter. So he's just bringing out this whole topic about the gospel he's presenting. It is a power for salvation, but for those who believe, and he doesn't ashamed of it. And then he talks about the Jews first, and also the Gentiles. Now, Paul does not immediately say it's for everybody. He say for the Jews first because he recognized this whole thing about salvation starts with the Jews, which he will also explain later on. Why? Because whether you like it or not, the Jewish people, they are God's chosen people. Okay? And so Jesus was a Jew. He came from a Jew. When you read the gospel, especially Gospel of Matthew, you realize that this whole thing about messiahship is very Jewish. Okay? And then, but it's not limited to the Jews. Okay? It's because the salvation program is, first of all, given to the Jewish people. So you read your Old Testament, they get the idea, they get the law, they get the instructions from God, they get the revelation, the prophecy, So when Jesus came, the Messiah came, it came for them first because they are supposed to understand it when they receive it. However, most of them did not. But nevertheless, there is a remnant. Right? The apostles, the 12 disciples, they were all Jews. Okay? So from then on, then the gospel spread to the Gentiles and then to the whole world. And this is a theme you'll find throughout the New Testament, or in fact, we should say throughout the whole Bible. That God, it seems like a pattern that God always starts with an individual and bring that process to the universal. There's always this pattern in God's action plan. It always starts with an individual before it brings it to the universal. And when you look at the Old Testament, you people like Abraham, it's individual. One person, one family, but it affects the whole universe. Every family will come before, every nation will come before him in front of God through that same promise. Right? One individual, then later on the whole world. So Jesus, Messiah, one individual. Then it affects the whole world. Adam, one person. Right? Of course, Eve, you can talk Eve, but they're married, right? So Adam and Eve consider one. But through them, sins affect the whole world. So it's always and very individual beginning, but then it becomes a whole universal implications. So Paul explained that subsequently, but you can see straight away Paul is presenting a very Jewish gospel. A gospel that is not detached from history. So most of us today, when we present a gospel, we jump straight into John 3:16. Jesus died for you, believe and to be saved, which is not wrong. But if you want to fully understand the concept of salvation, why Jesus must die, why only through Jesus, then you need the whole history of salvation. Now that's the theme, the key word is history of salvation, the whole history of it. And that is where you need to study a bit more. I can't tell you in 5 minutes time. Right? By the roadside, you want to evangelize, you cannot say, hey, okay, you must spend 3 hours with me, then I can tell you the whole story. You don't have that privilege. Right? So when you want to present the gospel to your friends, to your neighbors, you present the most concise version of it. And that is they need to know Jesus, they need to know they are sinners, and they need Jesus to be saved. Right? But when they pass through that, they say, okay, I want to believe in Jesus. Then you need to help them to grow in their knowledge of Christ. And that's where Bible study like this will be very helpful. Okay? Now, Paul also mentioned the word righteousness of God. Now, this word righteousness occurs 8 times in Romans. And this is a very important word, a word that is not easy to understand. What do you mean by righteousness? Now, in Romans, it is usually used in conjunction with faith. Something got to do with faith, right? So you gain it through faith, or you are with it through faith, and so forth. Now, among the commentaries that you come across in a Christian bookstore today about Romans, you'll find that scholars are not in agreement when it comes to this word. So I'm just going to summarize for you, and then I will choose one over the other, but I'll leave it to you if you disagree with this decision. It's up to you. Okay? So the three main views is up here. Some people think that it is referring to an attribute of God. That means a description of who God is. He's righteous, right? Righteousness. Another group will say, no, it's not talking about God's righteousness per se, but it's a status given by God. So it's God giving us the status of being righteous. It's two different things, you know. All right? And the third is saying, no, it's not about status per se or attribute. It's really about God's saving act. It's an action. So righteousness is not just an adjective to describe who God is, but because of what He does. All right? So righteousness of God is referring to His saving act. Right? So there are three schools of thoughts. So if you go back to the verse itself, it says here, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith to faith. So what righteousness is it being mentioned here? Okay, so there are this review, but let me tell you what is the most general view out there. The most people belongs to what we call the evangelical groups, or a more or less a more popular view is to refer to the second position, and that is God is giving us that status of righteousness. Because after all, that's what the gospel is supposed to do. Once we are redeemed, we gain this status of righteousness so that we can stand before God in the judgment throne. Okay, I'll talk more about that later, but just to let you know, there are three other views there. Now, this phrase, the righteous shall live by faith, is actually taken from Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. Now, in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, if you read the story in Habakkuk, God was responding to the prophet's complaint about God's inaction and injustice, because God's not doing anything. So the prophets complain, God, what's going on, how can this be, and so forth. And so here God tells the prophet that a righteous person, how you should deal with the difficulties in life, and how to deal with the contradiction between God's promise and what happened in history. And so the righteous person will live by faith. In other words, righteous live by faith simply says this: when you live on earth today, you may not get what you want, things can be hard, but as long as you have faith in God, or either number two, you trust in God's faithfulness. So there's two views here again. Okay? So you realize that when I start presenting, you say, I got two views, three views, four views, so which view you should follow? I do not want to say follow this view or that view immediately. I'll let you choose, but I will say which view I follow. Okay? But the modern view today is based on God's faithfulness. Because He is faithful, therefore we should be able to live. Don't worry about it. Okay? So He is quoting that, and of course today we quote that also, the righteous shall live by faith. It's an assurance for us that although we live on earth today, things are tough, not easy, but we will live because of what God has done for us. Okay. Now this is a picture of the graffiti that really mock those who hang on the cross, and you can see there's a horse there, right? Of course, it is not referring to Christians, but there are other groups that also use the cross for other reasons, but it is usually connoting a very negative image when a cross is used. And so it's not surprising for Paul to say, no, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. He really needs to point it out, because I believe many people were ashamed. it is not an easy gospel to preach. It causes more confusion. Sometimes I hear people, especially non-believers and atheists, tend to say that you Christians, you make this religion up. I mean, sounds so easy, just believe and have faith. My usual response is this: if I were to make this religion up, I'll make it better. This is so difficult to explain, to people. Jesus died for you. Why can't I just follow? You do good works, you'll be saved. Easier to explain. I mean, it sounds more logical. I mean, if I want to create a religion, I make one easier to understand. Do you realize that after you preach for some time, the gospel is still a mystery, We will come to that point afterward. Like there are certain things that you just can't understand why God does things this way. It's a mystery. So all I can say is, it must be true that God, Jesus himself have shown us this way. Otherwise, based on our human reasoning, you won't come out to this conclusion. And that's the reason why most of the religion that I know on earth today is about humans searching God. And to do that, you do good things. But Christianity is the other way around. It's God searching man, even though man has fallen. And not that you can do anything about it, because you can't, which we will explain further on. So this is something I want to remind all of us, that Christianity, the God that we believe, is truly awesome. And it's truly original. If I want to say PhD, he should be the first one who get PhD, because his idea is original, right? Marvin Page says, 1617 covers these 3 points. Number 1, gospel of Jesus Christ is the last and greatest divine act of salvation, deliverance on behalf of Israel and, for the matter, for the entire world. Number 2, gospel is first for the Jew and then for the Gentiles, which means that the 2 end times promise of the Old Testament and restoration of the Jews and the conversion of Gentiles are now being fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Number 3, it is by faith in Christ alone that anyone can receive the gospel of deliverance. And you can see that this is already holding a certain position. And we're talking about righteousness as more like a status, and through faith in Jesus Christ. Okay, now I won't go into the discussion because of time factor. We'll go into the next set of slides, which is really what I want to highlight today. So introductory material is really to tell you, Paul is trying to tell you what this is all about. We're going to talk about gospel, which is the main topic of the letter of Romans. And major part of it is really about this topic, and that is justification by faith. Okay? Justification by faith. So you realize that there are 3 important words in this section. You have Jesus Christ, of course, Christ. Then you have the word justification and the word faith. So these 3 things you will see it will appear quite a number of times in this section. If you want to have a more systematic way of looking through the different sections, so I've given you this slide. This is just to give you an outline from chapter 1:18 to chapter 5:11. And you can see how the argument is developed. First of all, Paul talks about everybody is sinful. All are accountable to God because of our sin. Okay, if you use the reform words, everyone is deprived. Depravity of sin. No one is able to do it well. Then he talks about the Jews are not excused. Even the Jews are sinful. They are also accountable. And he concludes with all under sin, chapter 3, verse 9 to 20. And therefore, all are guilty, because all are sinful. And when we are sinful, we cannot come before God. And so, God provides us a solution. And that's where chapter 3, verse 21 onwards, all the way to chapter 4, is how the solution is presented. It is through justifications and by faith, and how faith is at work, not just in the New Testament, even in the Old Testament, it is already in progress, in the sense that this pattern of trusting God to be considered righteous is not just a New Testament idea. Okay, we'll come to that afterwards. And chapter 5, verse 1 to 11 is just a summary of it. Therefore, we are saved through justification. Everyone can follow? Am I going too fast? Is it all right? Okay. So let's go to the first section, verse 18 to 32. Chapter 1, verse 18 to 32. This is another slight sectioning. If you want more sections, then you can have this. We'll go straight to the text. So verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people who suppress the truth by their unrighteousness, because what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. So straight away you see verse 18, 19 talks about wrath of God, which is something very important, the wrath of God. And then you have the word ungodliness, unrighteousness, and then the word suppress is mentioned. All these are key words, okay? Then verse 20, for since the creation of the world is invisible attributes, his eternal power and divine nature has clearly been seen, because they are understood through what has been made, so people are without excuses. Then you have verse 20, creation of the world become another key word. Following verse 21, for although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or give him thanks, but they became futile in their thoughts, and their senseless heart were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fool and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for an image resembling mortal human beings, or birds, or four-footed animals, or reptiles. And this is really talking about how deprived humans have become, how sinful human have become. We'll unpack one thing at a time. Let's start off with the wrath of God. What is this wrath of God? Now, some people think that it's just an ethical concept. But then when you read through the Old Testament, you realize it is a common picture of who God is. When people sin against God, the natural response that God gives is he will pour out his wrath upon them, which is really judgment. Okay? I think modern days church, we tend to downplay on that. We try to explain it out and say, sounds very negative. Don't want to focus so much on the negative part. Just focus on God being gracious and merciful. But when you read the Bible, this aspect of God being judgmental is there, and you cannot ignore them. Just because we live in the New Testament does not mean we are excluded from it. I'm not sure whether you heard about this term called hypergrace, right? The hypergrace is really a current phenomena where the church is almost focusing entirely on God's mercy and grace without the foundation of God's judgment and requirement. And it's a new thing because I personally felt that this is all coming from the influence of the American dream. People think that I can do it, just focus on the positivism and just keep telling people everything is okay, and it will be okay. Right? So, but then when you look at the history of the church, never once the church were like that. The church knew that when you sin against God, there will be punishment. Because it's very clearly stated, the wrath of God, and God will pour out his wrath, especially in the day of the Lord, and which we all know is talking about the last day. Okay? And here, Paul, quite difficult to understand what he's trying to say. He says that it is being revealed. What do you mean by the wrath of God being revealed? Now, a few people have come up with some ideas. Karl Barth says it is through the declaration of the gospel. So how? Because when the gospel is presented to you, and if you reject it, the wrath of God is already on you. Because you are not chosen. Because you will face the eternal condemnation based on your rejection of the gospel. And that's what Karl Barth says. Schiller says, through the history of the world, God revealed his wrath through the wars, through the different things that are happening around our world, and God is still judging the world, in the sense. Okay? Even though you don't see it as it is, but when you read the Old Testament, all these wars that you find in history, whether you like it or not, God's hand is behind it. Right? The destruction of the southern kingdom, northern kingdom, If you read it from a secular viewpoint, yeah, they're just being overpowered by Babylon, no, by Persian, no. But if you read it through the biblical eyes, they're being judged by God. So God's hand is behind all these things. So Sheila says, no, wrath of God is being revealed precisely because whatever is happening in history, God's hand is overseeing all these things. And God is still judging. But I like to follow what Keener says, because I think Keener's reading is closer to the context of Romans. And what he says is this: through God's giving sinners up to your sinfulness. See, the wrath of God can also be demonstrated in such a way that if you refuse to listen to God, God let you be. And that is really, really bad, because, if I have a son and he is misbehaving, of course I want to discipline my son. I want him to come back, right? And that is an act of love. But the moment I say, I give you up, it's my wrath to the max already. I cannot take it anymore. Boom, no more relationship with me. I don't care what happened to you anymore. And that is what you will see Paul say afterward. When a sinners refuse to respond to God, reject God, God gave them up. Let them do what they want to do. And eventually they will face the punishment in the days of the Lord. Okay, so that is the first thing I'll highlight, the wrath of God. Is everyone still around? Not too serious, huh? When you preach and teach this kind of thing, cannot not serious one, cannot, it's so serious, wrath of God, right? Now, then Paul says about, actually, everybody knows something about God, but they refuse to accept God. And in Paul's language, it is because they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. They suppress it. And so for Paul, truth is not something just you think about. It's something you do. It's something that you obey. Right? If God says, love your neighbor, you don't just think about loving your neighbor. You're going to do it. Then only you're saying you're obeying, you're trusting, and you're believing. If not, you are still suppressing. Right? So Paul says when people sin, they fail to embrace the truth, and therefore they're suppressing it. When you sin in a sense, you're acting in sin, right? When you do all these things that you know God does not like it, and you do it, that is a sign that you have failed to embrace the truth. So if you read John's letters as well of Paul, you find this thing repeating itself. And that is, if you say you remain in the truth, then your lifestyle should and ought to align with it. If you say, I believe in the truth, but your lifestyle, your behavior contradicts it, then according to Paul and John, you're not really in the truth. You understand what I'm saying? So, being in the truth is not just a mental thing. It's a whole being. You've got to live by it, transformed by it, right? And obey to the end. And therefore, according to Paul, again, through their unrighteousness, the people deny the truth. Now, some of you may then, as I present subsequently, you'll find that you might disagree with me. You say, Pastor, got other people not like that, what? Now, please, I'm not telling you this because I think like that. I'm just telling you what Paul is writing there. So you are not disagreeing with me, you're disagreeing with Paul. Okay? And I respect your disagreement, is fine. Because when Paul was writing this, he was not writing for us, modern day people. He was dealing with issues back in his own time. And these were the issues, the arguments that they raised. And Paul had to address that. And of course, based on what he raised, we can draw principles for modern day's church as well. But I always tell my students, Paul is not answering all our questions today. There will be questions left unanswered, but I think whatever Paul has presented here is sufficient enough for us to understand our Lord Jesus, our faith, salvation, and so that we can live our life with that. Follow? So there are a lot of questions that you probably may not get answers as well. We'll come to that point afterward, very soon. So this is suppression of truth in unrighteousness. And so, if that's the case, let me just give you some kind of theology terms. So Paul talks about, actually everybody can understand God, know God, because what? God has revealed himself through the creation. Now, in systematic theology, there are two types of revelation God has given to us. One is called general revelation. Okay? General revelation. In general, as in what you can see in the public sphere. Everybody can see it. In history, in creation, in human conscience, in the force of nature, in this world that's been sustaining. Now, with the dawn of science during the Enlightenment period, many people lost their faith, so to speak. Because because now we don't trust the church lah. Why need miracle? We need antibiotic lah, right? No need lah. So they have this shift. But in the dawn of 21st century, many Christians embrace faith. Many scientists embrace Christianity, embrace faith. Why? Because the more they study about the world, this world, the more they realize it cannot happen just by a bang. It's just too complex. And it makes more sense to have a creator. Now, many scientists today, they may not be Christians, but they will say, I believe in a creator. Okay? So they are agnostic. They say, I don't know who is this creator. There must be a creator. There must be a source of beginning that caused this whole universe to be like this. Because up to this point, now correct me if I'm wrong, that all this exploration of different planets, they go all over the universe. They still have not found a planet like Earth. Still tada, you know. So if you say it's a Big Bang, if it's a Big Bang, it should be repeatable, right? It should happen another cosmos. You find someone like Earth in a planet nearby. They should be able to find, but no, tada. And the complexity of this world, I always tell my members, if only our Earth just a little bit closer to the sun, we are living in Africa every day, you know, the barbecue, you know. If only we are just a little bit away from the sun, we'll be in North Pole every day. And somehow God, in His precise design, everything is just right. Okay? So that is general revelation, that God revealed Himself through His creation. And of course, if you look at history, okay, humankind comes from a certain descent. Right? Now, from a biblical story point of view, we all know we came from Adam and Eve, and then you came from Noah's family, right? Because the world is flooded, people die, and then you come from that generation. And so, everyone who birthed out of that generation should recognize God because they were encountering God back then. And so, there's no reason that we should not recognize God. The problem is whether the parenting is done well. Whether you have helped your children to recognize the existence of God. And of course, down the line, as you give birth, you find that there is people going away from God. And that's what we happen today. So that is general revelation. Okay? So human technically have no excuse to deny God. Their ancestors have seen God. The creation is revealing God. And therefore, you cannot say there's no God. There's another term, another type of revelation that is called special revelation. And as the name sounds, is special. And so it is given directly from God to a specific group of people. And that is to clarify this general revelation. Now you realize that the generation is important, but it is insufficient. People still do not know God, in a sense. They still suppress God. They still reject God. Okay? And I'm sure you hear all these stories about people who are good people. You know, they're trying to find ways to reattach themselves to God, but they just do not know the God anymore after generations of generations. Have you heard of this story about ancient China? There is this documentary produced. Ancient China, if you go to the palace, there is a temple in the palace. And the temple, there's no so-called idol inside. There's no statue, nothing, because the temple is dedicated to God in heaven. So it was said that, according to the documentary, the ancient Chinese, not the communist Chinese, by the way, ancient Chinese, they worship one God. And of course, there was a lot of politics involved, and the emperor wanted to divide the laity from, the what called the civic society from the royal family, and that's where they start to push people away from the real God to introduce all these funny other gods, right? And I mean, just a little bit information, even this whole thing about ghost month, do you know the story behind it? It's actually a very important month, you know. It's a holy month to worship God and for good events. But the king, the royal family wants it for themselves, so they spread all this fake news. So fake news is not new, by the way. Even ancient Chinese have done that, spread this fake news, and so that just to trick people, don't use this month, that there's ghosts coming out. So that's where they start avoiding doing anything. But then we all Christians, we all know better lah. So this ghost month thing, I've got so many weddings on that day, Christian weddings, because cheapest, right? Okay, come back. Special revelation. So God has given us special revelation to direct us back to Himself, because people fail to know God through general revelation. So what are they? The Torah, which is the 10 commandments, and the rest of the commandments. For the Jews, this is very important because that is God revealed His nature through the laws. And then the scripture, okay, by the time of Jesus and Paul, they do not have New Testament. What they have is the law, the writings, and the prophets. So this consists of the scripture back then. But for today, we will include even the New Testament. And of course, Jesus. Okay, Jesus is special revelation because Jesus came from heaven, directly on earth, incarnate, to reveal God to earth, because we cannot see God is invisible, but through the incarnation, God is made visible, and you can see Him through Jesus. Right? You read John's Gospel, Jesus says, when you see me, you see the Father. The disciple asked Jesus, can you show us the Father? What are you nonsense are you talking about? You're looking at Him now through me. Okay? So with that, then people are given that revelation to gain redemption. However, people reject that. And so, for Paul, he traced this whole thing back to idolatry. Why people refuse to accept God? Because they fail to honor God, they pervert that knowledge of God. Okay, so it's not that they do not believe there's a God, they just suppress it, do not believe in it, they ignore it. And because of that, they are not able to interpret the natural revelation anymore. And so Paul says, therefore, as a consequence, people do not worship the true God today, they worship idols instead. Okay? Now, generally, if you ask your neighbor, of course, you don't say, why you worship idols? They say, wow, yours is not idol, ours is idols. Wow, after they sue you, you better be careful. But generally, you ask people today, why do you worship your God? Most people would simply say, because of fear. Because of money. Or peace. Right? I just want something to protect me, you know. And if you question further, how do you know this will really works? They can't tell you, because my mother has been doing that now. And it seems to work, right? My parents have been telling me do this, and it seems to work. And so it is all based on suppression of truth. And let me tell you, the younger generation today, the generation X and Y, the millennials and the post-millennials, many of them are becoming agnostic and atheists because they find this whole thing about religion doesn't work, so they give it all up together. So in that sense, instead of having idols, they themselves become the idol. So the generation today, they suppress the knowledge of God, not to find another God, but they make themselves God. So this whole I generation is like that. So that's what Paul says here. I'm moving quickly. So Paul in verse 24 to 27 talks about sexual sin. Verse 24, therefore God gave them over in their desires of their hearts to impurity, to dishonor their bodies among themselves. They exchange the truth of God for a lie. They worship and serve creation rather than Creator, who is blessed forever. And for this reason, God gave them over to dishonorable passion. For their women exchanged the natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. Likewise, men also abandoned their natural relations with women and were inflamed in their passion for one another. Men committed shameless acts with men, received in themselves the due penalty for their errors. And that is what I say, this is the wrath of God being poured out, following what Keener says, that they are allowed to do whatever they want. I mean, have you heard people say this to you? If your God is so true, why God doesn't punish the evil people? Why God let them continue to do what is evil? And this is Paul's answers to you. God's wrath already poured out on them. And that is to let them do what they want. Because at the end of the day, the judgment will come. But not now. So in other words, these people who is against God, they are going into this cycle of death. They are just going deeper and deeper into ever-increasing sin. That's Douglas' move for you. And there's no way out. I mean, you ask people who are addicted to sin, to a certain sin, they can tell you they know it's wrong, but they just can't help it. Okay? So, for Paul, all these sinful things, it all start off with idolatry. Because, now, of course, this is nothing new. The Jewish people also see it that way. Because when people do not recognize true God, they have no fear of God that governs their life. And therefore, what governs their life? Their lust and their desire. And that becomes their idols. Okay? And so Paul talks about this sinful exchange, right? Sinners exchange God for idols, truth for lies, natural for unnatural. And you see it happen even in our society today, right? Say, if your God is so true, why people don't believe? Well, it's nothing new. God, Romans, Paul will make it very clear. People like it that way. People like fake news. Make it fake and spread it around. They like lies, right? Today, you tell someone, actually, you got some problem, you dare not say it. Just say everything is nice. It's actually lies. White lies. Some people like that. Natural and unnatural. Paul used a very explicit example in terms of sexual orientation. Right? And today is a rampant thing. This whole LGBTQIAS, very long now, is going against this. Right? You know what LGBTQIAS, right? This whole thing about... So for Paul, when God created you in this body with this sexual organ, so the natural way to use a sexual organ is to use it on the opposite sex. But the thing that people, nothing new by the way, in Paul's time already, they start to use it against the natural phenomena. They go against it. Right? So you have a nut and bolt, it works. Now you have nut and nut, bolt and bolt. How it works? And people like that. And Paul says that is precisely what God has revealed to us is true. That when you go against God, everything get haywired. You get lopsided. Now, there is research done today by socialists, not Christian socialists, non-believers socialists, and they are against this whole thing about LGBTQIA. Why? Because it is destructive for community and society. Eventually, I mean, how are you going to teach your children about sex education? And bear in mind, please, today, many children's program has become LGBTQIA friendly. So very soon your children will be studying Adam and Steve, not Adam and Eve anymore. And it is already happening. Now, of course, just to clarify that, as a church, we should not sideline people who have so-called different orientations. But I think the church we should stand on the biblical perspective. And the moment we lose our stand, we will no longer be the salt and light of the world. So we're not talking about whether we empathize with them or not, we're not against them. But you need to allow the Bible to be true. You need to follow after what God has revealed to us. And so I think we need to be careful not to be played into this whole game of, the church not empathizing, the church not being merciful. No, we're not talking about that. We love them. I love my friends. But loving them does not mean I agree with them. So that has to be made very clear. And so here, Paul says, I gave them up. God gave them up, right? Augustine says this, a soul that turns away from you, he's referring to God, from you, therefore lapses into sexual immorality when it seeks apart from you what it can never find in pure and serene form, except by returning to you. All those who wander far away and set themselves against you are imitating you, but in a perverse way. That means they try to be God, but in a perverse way. Yet by this very mimicry, they proclaim that you are the creator of the whole nature, and that in consequence there is no place whatever where we can hide from your presence. And simply by saying we can be God shows that there is a God. I mean, simply by imitating. Why you want to imitate in the first place? Why you want to make this judgment in the first place? Unless there is something there already that you want to mimic, and you, because of dissatisfaction and whatsoever, you come up with your own view. Okay? Now quickly move on, because of time factor. So verse 28 to 32, I won't dwell much here. Basically, Paul further explained. We call it a vice list. Vice list means things that, bad things that you shouldn't do, but these people do it, right? And just they do not see fit knowledge of God, they give them you can go back and read the rest. This vice list covers all sort of sins, all sort of behaviors, and it affects every fabric of society. So it doesn't just affect the poor, it also affects the rich. And back in the first century, there's no middle class, but today we have middle class. So it affects all fabric of society, and they threaten the nature and the harmony of civilizations. In other words, they are not the common good. Right? Whether non-Christian or Christian, when you see this list, you will try to avoid them. These are vice things. Okay? And for Paul, this is the result of corrupted mind. Again, it all starts with your faith in God. And if you do not believe in God, your mind is corrupt. And therefore, everything else that comes out from it will be corrupted as well. Okay? So that is it. Until verse 32. Everyone still okay? I'll get you to discuss a little bit in your group of 4 or 5. Now, so far, verse 18 to 32, we unpack quite a number of things. Just share with your friends, what have you learned, and use this keyword in your explanation in this little section so far. Nature of God, natural revelation, homosexuality, depravity. Everyone just take one keyword. Okay, because of time factor, we cannot share too long. So go in the group of 4 or 5 and share what you have learned so far. And from his word. Okay, can you do that? All right. Okay, do that now. Okay, because of time factor, we can't let you discuss for too long. Do you have any question you want to ask for now? Anyone have any questions? Anyone have any questions you want to ask? Yes. Uh-huh. To what? Okay. Yeah. Oh, by the way, I have not asked. What is your church position on LGBTQIAS? Sure, sure. Because I belong to Assemblies of God, our stand is very conservative. Okay. Okay. Now, this is our pastoral advice. If you know someone who is involved in this, first of all, you must break away that mindset or the perception that we are against you. You must break that away. So, in a sense, your language, your gesture need to change. I know many people find it, today. Then no need to talk already. They see your action like that, they don't even want to come near. Okay? Yes. So they will test it out. They will test it out. In other words, they will check. In other words, they will test you, see how you react. Okay? But if you can maintain your cool, and then you can still embrace them for who they are, then they will be more open. They may not want to change. Okay, put it in mind. It's not our role to change people. We must always believe that. Because the moment you start thinking, I come in here to change you, they can smell it. Then they will say, these people only know how to convert people. They're not genuine in love. So when we say we love them, don't expect them to change. I mean, in the sense that whether they change or not is up to God. Okay? But when you share and witness to them, of course you must remain in the stand. They will check on you. So what do you think? Now, by the way, nowadays, all these LGBTQIA people, they are very smart people. They are lawyers, doctors, and they study your Bible, okay? They know theology than many Christians. And they will challenge you. The Bible says this, but actually, if you're reading it this way, you can interpret this way, da. So it's not easy. But we can always fall back and say, well, the scripture is there and it's very obvious. However, when our life does not match the scripture, we should not twist the scripture to fit us. Right? If they do challenge you. But they can respect you if you hold your own position. But please do not feel that you want to change them. That is the one thing they really, really don't like. That they come into this place, everybody expect to change me. I have come across some people like that. They feel that church they're not genuine love. That's what they say. Oh, by the way, the Assemblies of God is hosting a conference on this issue, LGBTQIA, two-day conference, 2 days for Chinese, 2 days for English, and in September. Ask your pastor for more information. It's not easy, but at least we should be more loving. Yeah. Oh, very long. And it's getting longer. Yeah. You just Google LGBTQIAS. Then you can find all the acronym. What is it for as well? In fact, if you go to Facebook, there are more than 50 over gender you can choose. Today there's this gender called how many percent masculine, how many percent feminine. Can trace one? No. It's like then the new thing is they're arguing for this, that your gender is not determined by the doctor. Now it's the whole thing. They say, how can you say cannot? So when you give birth to a child, they cannot put them male or female. Yeah. Yeah, that's what the argument now. So they are going into that. But then the doctor on the other side of the camp says, how can you say it is not? I mean, you have that organ already, so what? So are you saying that organ doesn't make any sense? So there's a whole ball game of this whole argument. Come for the conference, by the way, if you are interested to discuss further. I cannot tell you more because we have so much more to cover, okay? Right, we'll take a break now. We'll do a 5 minutes if you can. Just do a quick one because we have a lot to cover today. So quickly go for a 5 minutes break, for a toilet break, whatever you need. We'll come back for this. All right?